What if I told you that an ancient document written by the apostles nearly 2,000 years ago reveals secrets about prayer and fasting that most Christians today have never heard of? This isn't some lost gospel or hidden conspiracy. It's a real first century text called the Didache, and it gives us an inside look at how the earliest Christians fasted, prayed, and prepared for powerful encounters with God. And what they practiced, it will completely change the way you think about prayer and fasting. So why did they do this? And more importantly, what can we learn from them today? Stick around, because what I'm about to share might revolutionize your spiritual life. I'm Pastor Ted Shuttlesworth, and I'm equipping believers to fast and pray effectively. For more free resources, check out ChristianFastingGuide.com. So the Didache, also known as the Teaching of the 12 Apostles, is an ancient Christian document written in the first century, possibly around AD 50 to 100. It's one of the earliest known writings outside of the New Testament, serving as a manual for Christian living, church practices, and spiritual discipline. Though not part of the Bible, the Didache was highly respected by the early church and gives us valuable insight into how the first Christians understood prayer, fasting, baptism, and daily faith in Christ. It's essentially a discipleship guide, showing how believers in the time of the apostles lived out their faith. One of the most powerful teachings the Didache teaches is that fasting wasn't just about personal breakthroughs. It was an act of love. The apostles wrote, "This is the way of life. First, love the Lord your God who made you. Second, love your neighbor as yourself. Third, do nothing to anyone else that you wouldn't like to happen to you. To keep these teachings, bless people who talk bad about you, pray for your enemies, and fast for people who persecute you." Did you catch that? They didn't just pray for their enemies, they actually fasted for the people who persecuted them. That's a different level of spiritual maturity. It's easy to fast when we're asking God for something we want, but the early church fasted for people who hated them. Jesus said in Luke chapter 6, 32 and 33, "If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you?" Fasting isn't just about receiving from God. It's about being transformed into his image. When you fast, do it from a place of love, not obligation. The Didache also reveals something fascinating about baptism. The apostles instructed that both the person being baptized and the one performing the baptism should fast beforehand. They wrote this: "Before baptism, both the person doing the baptism and the person being baptized should fast. If other church members are able, they should fast as well. The person being baptized should fast for 1 or 2 days beforehand." Think about that for a second. Today, people get baptized whenever they decide, often without any kind of preparation. But the early church saw baptism as so sacred and serious that they fasted before entering the water. Not just the person being baptized, but also the church community who were standing with them. Why? Because baptism is a public declaration of leaving behind the old life and stepping into a new covenant with Christ. They didn't take that lightly, and neither should we. Now, before I share the final insight from the Didache, which will actually challenge how you think about when you should fast, I want to give you something to help you grow in your understanding of fasting. I've put together a free fasting starter kit that breaks down tips about fasting, gives you prayer points, and recommends supplements that are a must when you're fasting. You can grab it using the link in the description. And if you really want to dive deep into biblical fasting, what it is, what it isn't, and how to do it correctly, I cover all of this and more in my book, The Complete Guide to Biblical Fasting. I'll leave a link in the description so that you can check it out. All right, now let's get into this last insight, because it might surprise you as it did me. The early Christians took fasting seriously, so seriously that they fasted twice a week every week. But here's the interesting part. The Didache says that the Pharisees also fasted twice a week, but they did it on Mondays and Thursdays. Since Jesus had rebuked them for hypocrisy, the early Christians didn't want anything in common with them. So they chose to fast on Wednesdays and Fridays instead. They weren't just fasting for tradition's sake. They were deliberate about everything they did. They saw fasting as a way to humble themselves before God, consecrate themselves, and keep their spiritual focus on their spiritual calling. The lesson here, fasting isn't about legalism, it's about devotion. The early church wasn't trying to impress people. They weren't checking off religious boxes. They were pursuing a deeper relationship with God. The early Christians understood something that many believers today miss. Fasting isn't an event, it's a lifestyle. And when we fast with the right heart, we're not just going through a religious ritual, we're positioning ourselves for greater encounters with God. When it's time to fast, many people like to abstain from things like sugar, coffee, or even social media. You might be surprised that I recommend not fasting social media. Are you shocked? Click or tap the screen to find out why, and I'll see you in the next one.